On Christmas morning, a rancher who had sworn never to love again found an abandoned baby in his barn, and with her a note that would force him to choose between the safety of his grief and the terrifying risk of his heart. What he didn't know was that someone powerful was watching, someone who would soon arrive with lawyers, money, and a claim that could rip the child from his arms forever. This is the story of a man who had lost everything, a baby who had nothing, and the brutal fight that would determine whether love alone could ever be enough. Watch until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story reaches across the world. The Montana winter had teeth that morning. Ethan Ward woke in the blue dark cold of Christmas dawn, same as he had for the past 15 years. Alone, silent, expecting nothing. The cabin walls pressed close around him, thick with the kind of quiet that settles into a man's bones when he's worked hard enough to keep the world at arm's length. Outside, the December wind carved through the pines, rattling the window frames, and somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped under the weight of ice. He didn't bother with coffee, didn't bother with the small rituals other men used to mark the holiday. Christmas had died for him the same winter his wife Emma had, and their unborn son with her. That was 15 Decembers ago. 15 years of learning how to wake up, work until exhaustion, and sleep dreamlessly in a house that had once been meant for a family. Ethan pulled on his boots, his hands moving with the mechanical precision of someone who had long ago stopped thinking about what he was doing. His sheepskin coat hung by the door, stiff with cold. He shrugged into it, grabbed his gloves, and stepped out onto the porch. The ranch stretched before him in shades of white and gray, the barn a dark shape against the snow-heavy sky, the pastures empty and frozen, the cattle already fed and tucked into the windbreaks he'd built along the north ridge. Everything in its place. Everything under control. That was how Ethan liked it. He had 200 acres of carefully managed solitude out here, 30 miles from the nearest town, and that was exactly the distance he needed between himself and the rest of humanity. People meant complication. People meant loss. Out here, there was only work, weather, and the cold clarity of survival. He crossed the yard toward the barn, his breath fogging in the stillness. The snow crunched under his boots, and the sound was so loud in the early morning silence that he almost didn't hear the other noise, a thin, stuttering cry that cut through the wind like something wounded. Ethan stopped. The cry came again. His first thought was an animal, a fox caught in wire, or a calf separated from the herd. But the sound was wrong, too high, too rhythmic, too human. His pulse kicked up, and before he could think better of it, he was moving toward the barn, faster now, the snow scattering under his boots. The double doors stood slightly ajar, which was wrong because he always latched them at night. Always. He pulled the door wide. The barn was dark, full of the warm animal smell of hay and old wood, and for a moment Ethan saw nothing unusual, just the shadows of empty stalls and the faint glow of dawn seeping through the gaps in the roof. Then he saw the bundle. It was lying in the center of the barn floor, tucked into the cleanest spot, as if someone had swept the hay away to make a cradle. A faded quilt, patched and threadbare, wrapped around something small. A blue knitted scarf trailed from one end. The crying came from inside. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. He crossed the barn in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside the bundle, his hand shaking as he pulled back the edge of the quilt. A baby. A newborn baby, red-faced and screaming, tiny fists flailing in the cold air. Jesus Christ, Ethan whispered. The child couldn't have been more than a few days old. Her skin was still wrinkled and new, her eyes squeezed shut against the world. She wore a thin cotton onesie, already damp with cold sweat, and the scarf wrapped loosely around her was the only thing that looked warm. Ethan's mind reeled. Who the hell leaves a baby in a barn? He scanned the shadows, half expecting someone to step forward, to explain, to take the child back. But the barn was empty, silent except for the baby's cries. Then he saw the note. It was tucked under the edge of the quilt, a single piece of lined paper torn from a notebook, the handwriting shaky and uneven. Please love her. I cannot. That was all. No name, no explanation. Just 6 words and a baby who would freeze to death if he didn't do something right now. Ethan's hands moved before his brain caught up. He scooped the baby into his arms, quilt and all, and pressed her against his chest. She was so small, impossibly small, and her cries were starting to weaken, her tiny body shivering violently. "Okay," he said, his voice rough. "Okay, I got you." He stood, cradling the child close, and ran. The cold hit him like a fist as he burst out of the barn, but he didn't slow down. His boots pounded across the yard, the baby's cries muffled against his coat, and he kicked open the cabin door so hard it slammed against the wall. Inside, the fire had burned down to embers. Ethan laid the baby on the couch and threw 3 logs onto the grate, his hands shaking so badly he almost couldn't strike the match. The kindling caught, and flames licked up around the wood. He turned back to the baby. She had stopped crying. That terrified him more than the crying had. "No, no, no," Ethan said, pulling the damp onesie off her tiny body. "Stay with me, kid. Come on." He grabbed a wool blanket from the back of the couch and wrapped her tightly, then held her close to the fire. Her skin was pale, her lips faintly blue, and for a horrible moment he thought he was too late. Then she coughed, a small wet sound, and started crying again. Relief hit Ethan so hard he had to sit down. He sank onto the floor in front of the fire, the baby cradled in his arms, and just held her while she screamed. It was the most alive sound the cabin had heard in 15 years. "All right," he said quietly. "All right. You're okay." But even as he said it, his mind was spinning. What the hell was he supposed to do now? Dent. Ethan had never held a baby before. Not once. Emma had been 5 months pregnant when the car accident happened. He'd never gotten to hold his son, never even gotten to meet him. And in the 15 years since, he'd made damn sure he stayed as far away from children as possible. They were reminders of everything he'd lost, everything he'd failed to protect. And now there was one in his arms. The baby, her, the note had said, was still crying, but it was a stronger cry now, full of indignation and hunger. Ethan had no idea what to do with that. "Okay," he said, looking down at her. "You're hungry. That makes sense." He glanced around the cabin as if a bottle of formula might magically appear. It did not. "Right," he muttered. "Think, Ward." He'd seen people feed babies in town. Bottles. Formula. There was a general store 30 miles away, but it wouldn't be open until afternoon on Christmas Day, if it opened at all. He had no car seat, no baby supplies, no clue. The baby's cries grew louder. All right, Ethan said. "Let me think." He stood and carried her to the kitchen, still wrapped in the blanket. There was milk in the fridge, whole milk, the kind he used for coffee. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. He poured a small amount into a clean mug, warmed it on the stove, and then stared at it helplessly. How the hell was he supposed to get it into her? He didn't have a bottle, didn't have a nipple, didn't have... Wait. He rummaged through the drawer under the sink and found a clean kitchen towel. He soaked one corner in the warm milk, then brought it to the baby's mouth. She latched on immediately. Ethan exhaled. "Okay," he said. "Okay. We can do this." For the next 20 minutes, he sat on the floor by the fire, carefully dripping milk into the baby's mouth one towel corner at a time. It was slow, clumsy work, and half the milk ended up on the blanket, but the baby drank enough to quiet down. Eventually, her eyes drifted shut, and she fell asleep in his arms. Ethan sat there, staring at her. She was so small, so fragile. Her tiny face was peaceful now, her breathing soft and even, and she was completely, utterly alone, just like him. He looked at the note again, still crumpled on the couch. "Please love her. I cannot." Whoever had written that had been desperate. Desperate enough to leave a newborn baby in a freezing barn on Christmas morning. Desperate enough to trust a stranger, or maybe desperate enough not to care. Ethan's jaw tightened. He should call someone. The sheriff. Social services. Someone who knew what the hell to do with an abandoned baby. But even as he thought it, something inside him recoiled. If he called, they'd take her. Put her in the system. She'd become a case number, shuffled between foster homes and social workers, and maybe, she'd get lucky and find a family who wanted her. Or maybe she wouldn't. Ethan looked down at the sleeping baby in his arms. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he whispered. The baby didn't answer. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Ethan sat there for a long time, the fire crackling beside him. the weight of the child warm against his chest. And for the first time in 15 years, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. Yum. By midday, Ethan had managed to cobble together a makeshift nursery. He'd lined a wooden crate with blankets and set it by the fire, creating a warm, safe place for the baby to sleep. He'd raided his linen closet for every soft towel he owned, fashioning crude diapers that were held together with safety pins he'd found in Emma's old sewing kit. The milk-soaked towel method was inefficient, but it was working, barely. The baby woke every 2 hours like clockwork, screaming for food, and each time Ethan scrambled to warm more milk and coax her into drinking. He was exhausted, fumbling, terrified he was doing everything wrong. But she was alive. That had to count for something. It was late afternoon when he heard the truck. Ethan's head snapped up from where he'd been dozing on the couch, the baby asleep on his chest. The sound of an engine cut through the stillness, growing louder as it approached up the long driveway. He tensed. No one came out here. Not on Christmas. Not ever. He stood carefully, cradling the baby, and moved to the window. A battered red pickup was pulling into the yard, and Ethan recognized it immediately. Jonas Hale. Relief and irritation warred in Ethan's chest. Jonas was his closest neighbor, though closest meant 10 miles away, and one of the few people Ethan tolerated. They'd grown up together, back when Ethan still lived in town. Before Emma. Before everything fell apart. Jonas had been the only person who'd respected Ethan's need for distance after the accident, never pushing, never asking for more than Ethan could give. But right now, Ethan didn't want company. He moved to the door and opened it just as Jonas climbed out of the truck, a casserole dish in his hands. Jonas was a bear of a man, broad-shouldered and gray-bearded, with the kind of weathered face that came from decades of Montana winters. He grinned when he saw Ethan. "Merry Christmas, you hermit," Jonas called. "Figured you'd be alone, so I brought—" He stopped. His eyes dropped to the bundle in Ethan's arms. "What the hell is that?" Jonas said. "A baby," Ethan said flatly. Jonas stared. "A baby?" "Yeah. Where the hell did you get a baby?" "Someone left her in my barn this morning." Jonas's jaw went slack. He set the casserole dish on the porch railing and crossed the yard in 3 strides, his eyes wide. "You're serious? Do I look like I'm joking?" Jonas peered at the baby, who was still asleep, her tiny face peaceful under the blanket. "Jesus, Ethan," he said softly. "Who would do something like that?" "I don't know," Ethan said. "There was a note. It said to love her." "That's it?" "That's it." Jonas ran a hand through his beard, his expression shifting from shock to concern. "You call the sheriff?" "No." "Social services?" "No." "Ethan, I'm not calling anyone," Ethan said, his voice hard. Jonas studied him for a long moment, and Ethan could see the wheels turning in his friend's head. Jonas knew what had happened 15 years ago, knew what Emma and the baby had meant to Ethan, knew what it had cost him to lose them. "You planning to keep her?" Jonas asked quietly. Ethan looked down at the baby in his arms. "I don't know," he said honestly. I can't send her back out there. Not yet." Jonas nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Then you're going to need help." "You don't have a choice," Jonas interrupted. "You got formula, bottles, diapers?" Ethan hesitated. "I'm using towels and cow's milk." Jonas's eyebrows shot up. "Towels and cow's milk. It's working." "Jesus Christ, Ethan." Jonas shook his head. "Okay, I'm going into town. I'll get supplies. You stay here, keep her warm, and for God's sake, don't let her drink any more cow's milk." "Why not?" "Because she's a human baby, not a calf." Before Ethan could argue, Jonas was already heading back to his truck. "I'll be back in 2 hours," he called over his shoulder. "Don't let her die." And then he was gone. Ethan stood on the porch, the baby warm against his chest, and watched the truck disappear down the driveway. For the first time all day, he let himself breathe. Jonas returned just after sunset, his truck bed loaded with supplies. He'd bought everything: formula, bottles, diapers, wipes, baby clothes, blankets, even a small bassinet. He hauled it all into the cabin like a man on a mission, muttering under his breath about stubborn ranchers and complete idiots. Ethan watched, bemused, as Jonas set up a makeshift changing station on the kitchen table and demonstrated how to mix formula. "See?" Jonas said, shaking the bottle. "You warm the water first, add the powder, shake it up. Test it on your wrist to make sure it's not too hot. Got it?" "Got it," Ethan said. "And for the love of God, don't use towels as diapers anymore. These things exist for a reason." Ethan bit back a smile. "Noted." Jonas softened. He looked at the baby, now awake and fussing in Ethan's arms, and his expression turned serious. "You really going to do this?" he asked. "Do what?" "Keep her." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I can," he said finally. I don't know if I'm built for this anymore." "You saved her life today," Jonas said. "That's a start. That's not the same as raising her." "Maybe not, but it's something." Ethan looked down at the baby. Her dark eyes were open now, staring up at him with an intensity that made his chest ache. "What if I screw it up?" he said quietly. Jonas clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Then you'll screw it up," he said. "Same as every other parent in the world. But at least you'll be trying." Ethan didn't answer. Jonas stayed for another hour, teaching Ethan how to change a diaper, how to burp the baby after feeding, how to swaddle her so she'd sleep longer. By the time he left, Ethan felt slightly less terrified. Slightly. That night, Ethan sat by the fire with the baby in his arms, watching her sleep. He still didn't know what he was going to do. Didn't know if he could really be what she needed. But for tonight, she was warm. She was fed. She was safe. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. He looked at the note again, still lying on the table. "Please love her." "I don't know how to do that anymore," Ethan whispered to the sleeping baby. "But I'll try. I swear to God, I'll try." The fire crackled softly. Outside, the Montana night was cold and vast. But inside, for the first time in 15 years, Ethan Ward's cabin felt like it might be something more than just a place to survive. It felt like it might be a home. The first week was hell. Ethan quickly learned that babies didn't care about schedules, weather, or the fact that he hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in days. The baby, he still hadn't named her, couldn't bring himself to make it that real, woke every few hours demanding food, warmth, clean diapers, or sometimes just company. He stumbled through those early days in a fog of exhaustion, learning through trial and error what every cry meant. The sharp, piercing wail was hunger. The whimpering, escalating cry was a dirty diaper. The inconsolable screaming that made his ears ring. That was gas, and Jonas had to come back and show him how to bicycle the baby's tiny legs to help her pass it. "You look like hell," Jonas observed one afternoon, finding Ethan slumped at the kitchen table, the baby asleep on his shoulder. "I feel like hell," Ethan muttered. "Welcome to fatherhood." The word landed like a stone in Ethan's chest. Fatherhood. Was that what this was? He still thought about calling someone. Every day he thought about it. The sheriff's number was programmed into his phone. Social services had an office in Helena. One call, and this would all be someone else's problem. But every time he looked at the baby, at her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, at the way she'd started to track his face when he leaned over her, at the soft sounds she made when she was content, he couldn't do it. Not yet. By the end of the first week, something had shifted. Ethan found himself talking to her as he worked around the cabin, narrating his day the way he'd once talked to Emma. He'd catch himself checking on her even when she was quiet, just to make sure she was still breathing. And when she smiled, a real smile, not just gas, Jonas assured him, something in Ethan's chest cracked open just a little bit wider. He named her on the 8th day. It was late at night, and he was sitting by the fire with her in his arms, watching the flames dance. She was awake, but calm, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight, and Ethan found himself thinking about the note. Please love her. Hope, he thought. That's what someone had been asking for. Hope that she'd find love. Hope that she'd be okay. Hope, he said aloud, testing the name. The baby made a soft cooing sound. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. Hope, that's you. It felt right. It felt like a promise, and Ethan Ward had never broken a promise in his life. The town found out about Hope 3 weeks later. Ethan had managed to avoid going into town for supplies, sending Jonas instead with a list and cash. But eventually, he ran out of excuses. Hope needed a proper checkup, needed vaccines, needed to be seen by someone who actually knew what they were doing. So on a cold January morning, Ethan loaded Hope into Jonas's truck. He still didn't have a car seat of his own, and made the 30-mile drive into town. The town of Pinewood was exactly as he remembered it. A single main street lined with brick buildings, a diner, a general store, a post office, and a church with a white steeple. Population 847 according to the sign at the town limits, and every single one of those people knew everybody else's business. Ethan had been avoiding this place for 15 years. Now, walking down Main Street with a baby in his arms, he felt every eye in town turn toward him. The whispers started immediately. "Is that Ethan Ward? Who's that baby? Where'd he get a baby?" Ethan kept his head down and walked straight to the clinic, a small building at the end of the street run by Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd been practicing in Pinewood for 30 years. She met him at the door, her face a mixture of surprise and professional composure. "Ethan," she said, "I heard you were back in town, and with a baby no less." "She needs a checkup," Ethan said simply. Dr. Chen nodded and led him inside. The examination was thorough. Dr. Chen checked Hope's weight, her reflexes, her hearing and vision. She asked questions, gentle, probing questions about where Hope had come from, how long Ethan had had her, whether he'd reported the abandonment. Ethan answered honestly, mostly. "And you're planning to keep her?" Dr. Chen asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm planning to take care of her," Ethan said. "For now." "For now," Dr. Chen repeated. She was quiet for a moment, studying him. "Ethan, you know I have to report this, don't you?" His stomach dropped. "I know." "I'll give you as much time as I can," she said. "But social services will want to do a home visit. They'll want to make sure she's in a safe environment." "She is," Ethan said firmly. "I believe you. But they'll need to see it for themselves." Ethan nodded stiffly. Dr. Chen finished the examination and handed Hope back to him. "She's healthy," she said. "You're doing a good job." The words caught him off guard. "Thank you," he said quietly. As he left the clinic, he could feel the weight of the town's attention pressing down on him. People were gathering on the sidewalk, their faces curious, judgmental, concerned. And then he saw her. A woman was standing across the street, watching him. She was elegant, older, dressed in a wool coat that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her expression was unreadable. But her eyes were locked on the baby in Ethan's arms. More specifically, on the blue knitted scarf tucked around Hope's blanket. The woman's face went pale. Ethan's instincts prickled. He adjusted his grip on Hope and started walking toward Jonas's truck. The woman crossed the street, moving quickly despite her age. "Excuse me," she called. Ethan kept walking. "Excuse me," she said again, closer now. "Please, I need to speak with you." Ethan stopped. He turned, and the woman was right there, her eyes fixed on Hope. "That scarf," the woman said, her voice shaking. "Where did you get that scarf?" "It was with her when I found her," Ethan said carefully. The woman's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's her. It's really her." "Who are you?" Ethan demanded. The woman looked up at him, and there were tears in her eyes. "My name is Clara Whitford," she said, "and I think that baby might be my granddaughter." Ethan's blood ran cold. The words hung in the frozen air between them, "my granddaughter," and for a moment the entire street seemed to stop. The few townspeople who had been watching from a distance leaned closer, their whispers carrying on the wind. Ethan pulled Hope tighter against his chest, instinctively protective. "Your granddaughter," he repeated, his voice flat and hard. Clara Whitford nodded, her eyes never leaving the baby. May I see her, just for a moment?" "No," Ethan said. The word came out sharper than he intended, but he didn't soften it. This woman was a stranger. She could claim anything. And the desperation in her eyes, the way she was staring at Hope like she was something lost and found. set off every alarm bell in Ethan's head. Claire's face crumpled. Please, I just need to know if it's really her. That scarf. I knitted that scarf. My daughter had it when she... Her voice broke. When she disappeared. Ethan's jaw tightened. I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you think you know about this baby, but she was abandoned, left in my barn to freeze. If she's connected to your family, then your family failed her. The words were brutal, and he watched them land like physical blows. Clara flinched. I know, she whispered. I know we failed, but please let me explain. Ma'am, I need to go. Ethan turned and walked toward the truck, his boots crunching through the snow. Behind him, he could hear Clara calling out, her voice breaking with emotion, but he didn't stop. He climbed into the passenger seat, hope still clutched to his chest, and nodded to Jonas, who was already behind the wheel. Drive, Ethan said. Jonas took one look at his face and hit the gas. They were 3 miles outside of town before Jonas spoke. What the hell was that about? I don't know, Ethan said. His heart was still pounding, adrenaline surging through his veins. She said Hope might be her granddaughter. Jonas whistled low. Well, that complicates things. It doesn't complicate anything. She doesn't have any claim to her. Ethan! She doesn't, Ethan insisted. Someone left Hope to die. I saved her. I've been taking care of her. That woman doesn't get to just show up and... And what? Jonas said quietly. Be her family? Ethan went silent. Hope shifted in his arms, making a small sound of contentment. She had no idea what had just happened. No idea that her entire world had just tilted on its axis. I need to talk to a lawyer, Ethan said finally. Jonas nodded. Yeah, you probably do. The next 3 days were a blur of phone calls and research. Ethan contacted a family lawyer in Helena, a woman named Margaret Reeves, who specialized in custody cases. She agreed to meet with him, and the next morning he made the 2-hour drive with Hope strapped into the car seat Jonas had loaned him. Margaret Reeves was a woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with the kind of directness Ethan appreciated. She listened to his story without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, and when he finished, she sat back in her chair and studied him. Mr. Ward, I'm going to be honest with you. Your situation is complicated. How complicated? Well, let's start with the basics. You found an abandoned baby and took her in. That's admirable. But you didn't report it to the authorities immediately, which means you're technically in violation of Montana's safe haven laws. Ethan's stomach sank. I didn't know. I understand. Most people don't. But the law requires that abandoned children be reported within 72 hours and turned over to the appropriate agencies. You're now 3 weeks past that deadline. So what does that mean? Margaret tapped her pen against the legal pad. It means that if social services gets involved, and Dr. Chen is legally obligated to report this, they could remove the baby from your care pending an investigation. The words hit Ethan like a fist to the gut. They can't do that, he said. She's safe with me. I've been taking care of her. I believe you, Margaret said. But the law doesn't care about good intentions. It cares about protocol. And right now you've skipped every step of the protocol. Ethan looked down at Hope, asleep in his arms. The thought of someone taking her away, of her being placed in some sterile foster home with strangers, made his chest tighten with a panic he hadn't felt since Emma died. What do I need to do? He asked. Margaret leaned forward. First, we file for emergency custody. It's not a guarantee, but given that you've been the baby's primary caregiver for 3 weeks, we have a decent argument. Second, we cooperate fully with social services when they come for the home visit. Show them that you're capable, that the baby is thriving, that you're doing everything by the book. And this woman, Clara Whitford, what about her? Does she have any legal claim? She says the baby might be her granddaughter. Margaret's expression sharpened. Might be? She recognized the scarf the baby was wrapped in, said it belonged to her daughter. Has she provided any proof? DNA test? Birth records? No, she just showed up in town and made the claim. Margaret made a note. Then right now she has no legal standing, but if she can prove a biological connection, that changes things. Family members, especially grandparents, have more rights than strangers in custody cases. So what you're saying is, I could lose her. Margaret met his eyes. I'm saying you need to be prepared for a fight. If Clara Whitford can prove that baby is her granddaughter, and if she petitions for custody, you're going to be up against money, family ties, and the assumption that blood matters more than circumstance. That's bullshit, Ethan said. I agree, but it's also the law. Ethan sat there, his mind racing. He thought about the past 3 weeks, the sleepless nights, the fear, the slowly growing bond between him and Hope. He thought about the way she'd started to recognize his voice, the way she'd calmed down when he held her. He thought about the note. Please love her. I'm not giving her up, he said. Margaret nodded. Then we fight. The home visit came 5 days later. A social worker named Linda Martinez arrived at the ranch in a county vehicle, carrying a clipboard and a polite but distant expression. She was younger than Ethan expected, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Mr. Ward? She said when he answered the door. That's me. I'm Linda Martinez with Child Protective Services. I'm here to conduct a home assessment regarding the minor child currently in your care. Ethan stepped aside. Come in. Linda entered the cabin, her eyes sweeping the space with professional efficiency. Ethan had spent the past 2 days cleaning, scrubbing floors, organizing supplies, making sure everything looked as safe and stable as possible. Hope's bassinet was set up near the fireplace, surrounded by neatly folded blankets and diapers. The kitchen was spotless. The fire was burning low and steady. Where's the child now? Linda asked. Sleeping, Ethan said, nodding toward the bassinet. Linda walked over and looked down at Hope, her expression softening slightly. She looks healthy. She is. Dr. Chen examined her last week. I can give you the records. That would be helpful. For the next hour, Linda went through a seemingly endless checklist. She inspected the cabin, checked the smoke detectors, asked about Ethan's income and employment, his criminal history, his support system. She took notes on everything, her pen scratching across the clipboard in a steady rhythm that made Ethan's nerves fray. Do you have family nearby? Linda asked at one point. No, my parents are dead, no siblings. Friends? Support network? Jonas Hale. He lives about 10 miles away. He's been helping me with supplies and advice. Linda made a note. And the child's mother? Have you had any contact with her? No, I don't know who she is. What about Clara Whitford? Ethan's jaw tightened. What about her? She's filed a report claiming the child may be her granddaughter. Have you spoken with her since your encounter in town? No. She's requested a DNA test. Ethan's hands curled into fists. On what grounds? She believes the child is related to her missing daughter. If that's true, Mr. Ward, she would have a legitimate claim to custody. She left Hope to die, Ethan said, his voice hard. Or someone in her family did. That scarf was the only thing keeping her warm when I found her. If Clara Whitford cared so much about her granddaughter, where the hell was she on Christmas morning? Linda's expression remained neutral. I understand your feelings, Mr. Ward, but family reunification is always the goal in these situations. If Clara Whitford can prove a biological connection and can provide a safe, stable home, the court will consider her claims seriously. And if I say no to the DNA test? Then you'll look like you have something to hide, and that won't help your case. Ethan looked down at Hope, still sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a stranger, a problem, a complication he'd never asked for. Now she was his. Fine, he said. Do the test. The DNA results came back in 10 days. Ethan was in the barn, mucking out stalls while Hope napped in a baby carrier strapped to his chest when Jonas drove up with the envelope. Came to my place by mistake, Jonas said, handing it over. You want me to stay? Ethan looked at the envelope. His name was printed on the front in official lettering, with the lab's logo in the corner. No, he said. I need to do this alone. Jonas squeezed his shoulder. Call me if you need anything. He left, and Ethan stood there in the barn, the envelope in his hands, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. He opened it. The results were clear and clinical, full of percentages and genetic markers, but the conclusion was simple. Probability of biological relationship between subject, Hope Ward, and Clara Whitford. 99.7%. Hope was Clara's granddaughter. Ethan's knees went weak. He sank down onto a hay bale, the paper trembling in his hands. Hope stirred against his chest, making a small sound, and he placed a hand on her back, steadying her. "It's okay," he whispered. "I've got you." But even as he said it, he knew nothing was okay. Clara had proof now. She had a biological claim. And if she petitioned for custody, when she petitioned for custody, Ethan would be fighting an uphill battle against the law, against money, against the assumption that family always came first. He looked down at Hope. She'd gained weight in the past month. Her cheeks were fuller, her skin healthier. She'd started making more sounds, trying to mimic the tones of his voice. She smiled when she saw him now. Real, genuine smiles that lit up her entire face. She was thriving, and he was going to lose her. Yes. The petition came 3 days later. Margaret Reeves called him the moment it was filed. "Clara Whitford is seeking full custody," she said without preamble. "She's filed an emergency petition claiming that as the biological grandmother, she has the right to care for the child." Ethan's chest tightened. "What do we do?" "We fight. We file a counter-petition for custody based on your role as the child's primary caregiver. We argue that removing her from your care would be detrimental to her well-being, and we hope the judge sees it our way." "What are the odds?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, not great. Clara has family ties, financial stability, and she's already hired a very expensive lawyer out of Helena, but we have one thing on our side." "What's that?" "The truth. You saved that baby's life, Ethan. You've cared for her, loved her, kept her safe. That matters. We just need to make sure the judge sees it." The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In that time, Ethan threw himself into preparation. He documented everything, every feeding, every diaper change, every milestone. He took Hope to another checkup with Dr. Chen, who wrote a glowing report about her development and Ethan's care. He asked Jonas to write a character reference. He even reached out to a few people in town who remembered him from before Emma's death, asking them to speak on his behalf. But nothing felt like enough. At night, he'd sit by the fire with Hope in his arms, and he'd wonder what he was supposed to do, how he was supposed to let go. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered to her one night. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to lose you too." Hope blinked up at him, her dark eyes serious, and wrapped her tiny hand around his finger. And Ethan realized with a clarity that cut straight through his fear, he wasn't going to let her go without a fight. The courthouse in Helena was a stolid brick building that had stood for nearly a century, its steps worn smooth by the passage of countless people seeking justice. Ethan climbed those steps on a gray February morning, hope bundled against his chest, and felt the weight of every decision that had led him here. Margaret met him at the entrance, her briefcase in hand and her expression all business. "Remember," she said as they walked through the metal detectors. "Stay calm. Answer questions directly. And whatever you do, don't let them make you lose your temper. Clara's lawyer is going to try to paint you as unstable, a grieving widower who took a baby out of some misguided attempt to replace what he lost. Don't give him ammunition." "I won't," Ethan said. But when they entered the courtroom and he saw Clara Whitford sitting at the opposing table, flanked by a man in an expensive suit, his resolve wavered. Clara looked different than she had in town. She was still elegant, still composed, but there was something brittle about her now. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. When she saw Hope, her expression crumbled for just a moment before she composed herself again. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Andrew Morrison entered, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of stern expression that made it impossible to read his thoughts. "This is a hearing regarding the custody of the minor child known as Hope Ward," the judge said, glancing at the papers before him. "I've reviewed the filings from both parties. Miss Whitford, you're seeking custody on the grounds of biological relationship. Mr. Ward, you're seeking to maintain custody on the grounds of being the child's primary caregiver. Is that correct?" Both Margaret and Clara's lawyer, a man who introduced himself as Richard Brennan, confirmed. "Very well," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Brennan, you may begin." Richard Brennan stood, his movements smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about family. Clara Whitford is the biological grandmother of this child. Her daughter, Rebecca Whitford, gave birth to this baby and then, in a moment of crisis and desperation, made the tragic decision to abandon her. But that doesn't erase Clara's right, or her desire, to care for her granddaughter. He turned to gesture at Clara, who was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Mrs. Whitford has spent the past month trying to locate her daughter, trying to understand what happened. She has the financial means to provide this child with everything she needs: education, healthcare, stability. She has a home, a community, a support system. And most importantly, she has love. She wants nothing more than to give this child the life her daughter couldn't. Brennan's voice was smooth, persuasive, and Ethan felt his stomach tighten. In contrast, Brennan continued, we have Mr. Ethan Ward, a man who lives alone on a remote ranch with no family, no support system beyond a single neighbor, and a history of severe depression following the death of his wife. A man who, rather than following the law and reporting an abandoned child, took it upon himself to keep her, essentially kidnapping her under the guise of rescue. Objection, Margaret said sharply. Mr. Ward is not being charged with kidnapping. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. Mr. Brennan, keep your characterizations factual. Brennan nodded smoothly. Of course, Your Honor. My point is simply this. While Mr. Ward's actions may have been well-intentioned, they do not supersede the biological grandmother's right to care for this child. Mrs. Whitford is ready, willing, and able to provide a stable, loving home. The law is clear on this matter. Family comes first. He sat down, and Ethan felt the room tilt slightly. It was Margaret's turn. She stood, and her voice was quiet but firm. Your Honor, Mr. Brennan is correct that the law values family. But he's wrong about what family means in this case. Because the truth is, when this baby was abandoned in a freezing barn on Christmas morning, her biological family wasn't there. Clara Whitford wasn't there. Her daughter wasn't there. The only person who was there was Ethan Ward. Margaret walked toward the judge's bench. Mr. Ward found a newborn baby who was hours away from dying. He took her in. He fed her. He kept her warm. He learned how to care for her despite having no experience, no training, and no legal obligation to do so. And over the past 6 weeks, he has become her father in every way that matters. She turned to look at Ethan, and he felt the weight of her words settle over him. This isn't about who has more money or a bigger house. This is about who has proven, through action, that they will put this child's needs above their own. And the evidence shows that person is Ethan Ward. Margaret returned to her seat, and Judge Morrison looked at both parties. I'd like to hear testimony, he said. Mr. Brennan, call your first witness. The petitioner calls Clara Whitford to the stand. Clara stood, her movements slow and deliberate, and walked to the witness stand. She was sworn in, and then Brennan began his questioning. Mrs. Whitford, can you tell the court about your daughter, Rebecca? Clara's voice was soft, trembling. Rebecca is my only child. She's 32 years old. She struggled with addiction, with mental health. I've tried to help her, tried to be there for her, but she kept pushing me away. Did you know she was pregnant? No, she disappeared 6 months before the baby was born. I hired investigators. I filed missing persons reports. I did everything I could to find her. And when you saw the baby in Mr. Ward's arms, when you recognized the scarf, what did you feel? Clara's face crumpled. Relief and horror, because I realized Rebecca had been pregnant, had given birth, and had been so desperate that she left her own child to die. And I blamed myself. I should have found her. I should have done more. Do you want custody of your granddaughter? More than anything. She's all I have left of Rebecca, and I want to give her the life Rebecca couldn't. I want to give her everything. Brennan nodded and sat down. It was Margaret's turn to cross-examine. Mrs. Whitford, she said, standing, you said Rebecca struggled with addiction. What kind of addiction? Clara hesitated. Opioids and alcohol. And you said you tried to help her. Can you describe what that help looked like? I sent her to rehab 3 times. I paid for therapy. I gave her money when she needed it. Did you ever consider that giving her money might have enabled her addiction? Clara's eyes widened. I was trying to help. I'm sure you were. But the fact remains that Rebecca continued to struggle, continued to push you away, and eventually disappeared entirely. Is that correct? Yes, Clara whispered. And in the 6 months she was missing, did you ever report her pregnancy to the authorities? I didn't know she was pregnant. But you suspected something was wrong. You said you hired investigators. Yes. And they never found her. Clara's hands trembled. No. Margaret's voice softened. Mrs. Whitford, I don't doubt that you love your granddaughter, but love isn't the same as capability. You couldn't save your daughter. What makes you think you can raise her child? The courtroom went silent. Clara looked at Margaret, tears streaming down her face, and for a moment she had no answer. Then she said quietly, because I have to. Because if I don't, then I've lost them both. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. Mr. Brennan, any redirect? No, Your Honor. Very well. Ms. Reeves, call your witness. Margaret stood. The respondent calls Ethan Ward to the stand. Ethan handed Hope to Jonas, who'd been sitting in the gallery, and walked to the witness stand. His heart was pounding, but he kept his face neutral as he was sworn in. Margaret approached him. Mr. Ward, can you tell the court what happened on Christmas morning? Ethan took a breath and told the story, finding Hope in the barn, the note, his decision to take her in. He described the first terrifying days, the learning curve, the slow realization that he couldn't let her go. Why didn't you report her immediately? Margaret asked. Because I was afraid, Ethan said honestly. Afraid that if I called social services, she'd disappear into the system. Afraid that she'd end up somewhere unsafe. Afraid that no one would care about her the way I'd started to. And do you care about her? Ethan looked at Hope, still in Jonas's arms across the courtroom. She's my daughter, he said simply. Maybe not by blood, but by choice. And that matters. Margaret nodded. No further questions. Brennan stood for cross-examination, and his expression was sharp. Mr. Ward, you mentioned fear. Would you say you've struggled with fear or anxiety in the past? Everyone struggles with fear, Ethan said carefully. But you've struggled more than most, haven't you? Your wife died 15 years ago, and by your own admission, you've lived alone ever since, isolated, cut off from the world. I've lived quietly. You've lived like a man afraid to connect with anyone, afraid to be hurt again. And now you've attached yourself to this baby as a way to fill that void. That's not true, isn't it? You lost a child before he was born, and now you've found one you can pretend is yours. Objection, Margaret said, argumentative. Sustained, but the damage was done. Ethan could see the judge watching him, weighing Brennan's words. Mr. Ward, Brennan continued, do you really believe you're the best person to raise this child? A man with no family, no support, living 30 miles from the nearest town? Ethan met his eyes. I believe I'm the person who was there when she needed someone, and I'll keep being there no matter what. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Morrison looked at both parties. I'll take this under advisement, he said. I'll issue my ruling within the week. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell, and Ethan stood on shaking legs. It was over. Now all he could do was wait. The week of waiting was the longest of Ethan's life. He went through the motions, feeding Hope, changing her, walking the length of the cabin with her in his arms when she fussed. But his mind was elsewhere, trapped in the courtroom, replaying every word, every look from Judge Morrison. He'd wake in the middle of the night, his heart racing, convinced that someone was coming to take her away. And each morning, when he found her still asleep in her bassinet, the relief was so overwhelming it left him shaking. Jonas came by every day, bringing food Ethan barely touched and offering reassurances that felt hollow. You did good in there, Jonas said on the third day, watching Ethan pace the cabin. The judge saw the truth. Did he? Ethan stopped, turning to face his friend. Or did he see a broken man trying to replace what he lost? That's what Brennan wanted him to see. Doesn't mean that's what he saw. Ethan looked down at Hope, who was lying on a blanket by the fire, kicking her legs and making soft cooing sounds. She'd grown so much in 6 weeks. She was stronger now, more alert, her eyes tracking movement across the room. She'd started reaching for things, her tiny fingers grasping at air, at fabric, at Ethan's face when he leaned close. "What if I lose her?" Ethan said quietly. Jonas was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Then we'll deal with it. But until that happens, you're still her father, so be her father." The words settled over Ethan like a weight and a comfort all at once. He picked Hope up, cradling her against his chest, and felt her relax into him the way she always did. This was familiar now. This was home. "You're right," Ethan said. "Whatever happens, I've got right now." But even as he said it, the fear didn't leave. On the 5th day, Margaret called. "The judge wants to see you," she said. "Both parties, tomorrow morning at 10. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Is that normal?" "It's not unusual. Sometimes judges want to ask follow-up questions before they issue a ruling. But Ethan," she paused, "he specifically asked that you bring Hope." "Why?" "I don't know, but it could be a good sign, or it could mean he wants to see how she reacts to Clara." Ethan closed his eyes. "So we still don't know anything?" "No, but tomorrow we will." That night, Ethan didn't sleep at all. He sat in the rocking chair by Hope's bassinet, watching her sleep, memorizing every detail of her face. The way her eyelashes rested against her cheeks, the small birthmark on her left shoulder, the way she'd curl her hand into a fist and tuck it under her chin. "I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow," he whispered to her. "But I need you to know something. These past 6 weeks, they've been the best 6 weeks of my life. You gave me a reason to wake up, a reason to keep going, and no matter what happens, no matter where you end up, you'll always be my girl. Always." Hope sighed in her sleep, and Ethan felt something crack inside his chest. He'd spent 15 years building walls around his heart, and this tiny human had demolished them in 6 weeks. If he lost her, he didn't know how he'd survive it. The morning came too quickly. Ethan dressed Hope in the nicest outfit Jonas had bought her, a soft pink onesie with little flowers embroidered on the collar, and wrapped her in the blue scarf that had started all of this. He packed her diaper bag with meticulous care, making sure he had everything she might need, and then stood in the doorway of the cabin, looking back at the space they'd shared. It felt like saying goodbye. "Come on," Jonas said gently, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Time to go." The drive to Helena was silent except for Hope's occasional babbling from the back seat. Ethan kept glancing back at her in the rearview mirror, watching her play with her hands, oblivious to the storm gathering around her. When they pulled up to the courthouse, Ethan saw Clara's car already parked in the lot. His hands tightened on the door handle. "You ready?" Jonas asked. "No," Ethan said, "but let's go anyway." Margaret met them at the entrance, her expression unreadable. "Any idea what this is about?" Ethan asked. "Not yet, but stay calm, answer honestly, and trust the process." They walked through security and down the long hallway to the same courtroom they'd been in a week ago. Clara was already seated at her table, her lawyer beside her, and when she saw Hope, her face went pale. Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness so strong it nearly knocked him sideways. The bailiff called them to order and Judge Morrison entered. He looked tired, Ethan thought, like this case had kept him up at night too. "Please be seated," the judge said. He looked at both parties, then at Hope, who was contentedly chewing on her fist in Ethan's arms. "I've spent the past week reviewing the testimony and evidence in this case. I've also done some additional research into Montana custody law, and I've consulted with child psychologists about what's in the best interest of this child." Ethan's heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear. "Before I issue my ruling," Judge Morrison continued, "I want to ask both of you a question. Mrs. Whitford, we'll start with you. If you were granted custody of this child, what would her life look like?" Clara stood, her hands clasped in front of her. "Your Honor, I would give her everything. The best schools, music lessons, art classes. I have a 4-bedroom home in Helena with a yard and a garden. She'd have her own room, decorated however she wanted when she was old enough to choose. I'd make sure she knew about her mother, about Rebecca, so she'd understand where she came from. And I'd love her. I'd love her the way I should have loved Rebecca better." Her voice broke on the last words, and she sat down quickly, dabbing at her eyes. Judge Morrison turned to Ethan. "Mr. Ward?" Ethan stood, Hope still in his arms. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. How could he compete with what Clara was offering? He had a cabin, not a house. He had a ranch 30 miles from town, not a neighborhood full of children. He had no music lessons or art classes to offer. But then Hope turned her face toward him, and he felt her small hand grip his shirt. "Your Honor," Ethan said slowly, "I can't give her everything Clara can. I don't have a big house or a lot of money. I can't promise her piano lessons or private schools. But I can promise her this. She'll always know she's wanted. She'll always know that someone chose her, not because they had to, but because they couldn't imagine life without her. She'll grow up knowing what it means to work hard, to be self-sufficient, to find strength in quiet places. And she'll grow up knowing she's loved, not perfectly, not without mistakes, but completely." He paused, looking down at Hope. "She already knows my voice. She already reaches for me when she's scared. She's already home. And I'm asking you to let her stay there." The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison watched him for a long moment, then looked at Clara, then back at Hope. "Mr. Ward, may I hold her?" the judge asked. Ethan's breath caught. "Yes, Your Honor." He walked to the bench and carefully placed Hope in the judge's arms. She squirmed for a moment, looking around at this unfamiliar face, and then let out a small cry. Judge Morrison bounced her gently, but she kept crying, her face scrunching up in distress. "It's all right," the judge said quietly to her. Then he turned to Clara. "Mrs. Whitford, would you come here, please?" Clara stood and approached the bench. The judge carefully transferred Hope into her arms. Ethan's entire body went rigid. Hope's crying intensified immediately. She arched her back, her small fist pushing against Clara's chest, her face red and panicked. Clara tried to soothe her, bouncing her, shushing her, but Hope only screamed louder. "Please," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Please, sweetheart, it's okay." But Hope was inconsolable. Judge Morrison looked at Ethan. "Mr. Ward." Ethan crossed to Clara in 3 strides, and the moment he took Hope back into his arms, she stopped crying. Her breathing was ragged, her face wet with tears, but she pressed herself against his chest and let out a shuddering sigh. Silence. Judge Morrison watched this exchange with an expression Ethan couldn't read. "Thank you," the judge said. "You may return to your seats." Ethan walked back to his table on shaking legs, Hope still clutched against him. Margaret leaned over. "That was good," she whispered. "That was very good." Judge Morrison shuffled his papers, then looked up. "I've made my decision," he said. Ethan stopped breathing. "This is a case where the law and the heart are in conflict. Mrs. Whitford has a biological claim to this child. She has the financial means to provide for her. She has expressed genuine love and remorse, and in most cases that would be enough for me to grant custody to a blood relative." Ethan felt the world tilting. "However," the judge continued, "this is not most cases. The law requires me to consider what is in the best interest of the child. And after reviewing all the evidence, after watching how this child responds to each of you, I believe that best interest is clear." He looked at Ethan. "Mr. Ward, you saved this child's life. You've cared for her, nurtured her, and formed a bond with her that is evident to everyone in this courtroom. You may not have everything Clara Whitford can offer, but you have something more important. You have this child's trust. And trust once given by someone so young and vulnerable is not something we should take lightly." Judge Morrison picked up his gavel. "Therefore, it is the order of this court that temporary custody of the minor child known as Hope Ward be granted to Ethan Ward, pending a final hearing in 6 months to determine permanent custody. Mrs. Whitford, you are granted supervised visitation rights 1 day per week, to be arranged through Mr. Ward." The gavel fell. Ethan couldn't move, couldn't process what he'd just heard. "You won," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. "Ethan, you won." Across the room, Clara had collapsed into her chair, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Brennan was speaking to her in low tones, but she wasn't listening. Ethan looked down at Hope, who had fallen asleep against his chest, exhausted from crying. "We won," he whispered to her. "You get to come home." But as he glanced back at Clara, still weeping at her table, he didn't feel victorious. He felt the weight of what this meant. For her, for Hope, for all of them. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, Jonas was waiting on the steps. When he saw Ethan's face, he broke into a wide grin. "You got her." "For now," Ethan said. 6 months. Then we do this all over again. Then we've got 6 months to show that judge he made the right call." Jonas clapped him on the shoulder. "Come on, let's take your daughter home." The words settled over Ethan like a benediction. Daughter. She was his daughter. For the next 6 months, at least, she was his. The drive back to the ranch was different than the drive there had been. The weight that had been pressing on Ethan's chest for weeks had lifted, replaced by something lighter, something that felt almost like hope. When they pulled into the driveway and Ethan carried Hope into the cabin, everything looked the same. The fire crackling in the hearth, the bassinet by the window, the rocking chair where he'd spent so many sleepless nights. But it felt different. It felt like a future. "I'm going to head out," Jonas said from the doorway. "Let you two settle in." "But Ethan," he paused. "I'm proud of you. You did good." After Jonas left, Ethan sat in the rocking chair with Hope in his arms and just breathed. They'd won. But as the relief faded, reality set in. He had 6 months to prove to Judge Morrison and to himself that he could do this. 6 months to show that he was stable, capable, ready to be a father permanently. And then there was Clara. The image of her face in the courtroom, devastated, broken, haunted him. She'd lost her daughter, and now she'd lost her granddaughter too, at least partially. He thought about the supervised visitation, 1 day a week. That would start soon, and Ethan wasn't sure he was ready for it. The first visitation was scheduled for the following Saturday. Margaret had arranged for it to take place at a neutral location, a family resource center in Helena that had supervised visitation rooms. Ethan arrived early, Hope bundled against the February cold, and waited in the parking lot until he saw Clara's car pull in. She looked smaller than she had in the courtroom, older, defeated. When she saw Hope, though, her entire face transformed. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Hello." The visitation supervisor, a kind-faced woman named Maria, led them to a small room with toys, books, and a comfortable couch. Ethan sat in a chair in the corner while Clara settled onto the floor, Hope lying on a blanket in front of her. For the first 10 minutes, Hope just stared at Clara, uncertain. Clara didn't push. She just talked to her softly, showing her colorful toys, making gentle sounds. Slowly, Hope began to relax. She reached for a stuffed rabbit Clara offered, and when she grabbed it, Clara's face lit up with such pure joy that Ethan felt something shift in his chest. This woman wasn't a villain. She was just someone who'd lost everything and was trying desperately to hold on to the one piece that remained. By the end of the hour, Hope had fallen asleep in Clara's arms, and when Maria quietly told them time was up, Clara looked like she might cry. "Thank you," she said to Ethan as she carefully transferred Hope back to him. "Thank you for letting me see her." "The judge said you have the right," Ethan said. "I know, but you could have made it difficult, and you didn't." They stood there for a moment, this man and this woman, both loving the same child in different ways. "She looks happy," Clara said softly. "With you. She looks loved." "Is," Ethan said. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "That's all I wanted, for someone to love her the way Rebecca couldn't." As Ethan drove home that afternoon, Hope asleep in the back seat, he realized something. Clara wasn't his enemy. Grief was. Fear was. But Clara? She was just another person trying to survive loss. And maybe they could figure out how to do this together. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Every Saturday, Ethan would drive Hope to Helena for her visit with Clara. And every Saturday, he'd watch Clara hold her granddaughter with such tenderness it made his chest ache. Clara would bring new toys, new books, new outfits she'd bought during the week. She'd sing to Hope in a soft, wavering voice. She'd tell her stories about Rebecca, carefully chosen stories that painted her daughter as someone who'd struggled but tried. And slowly, Hope began to recognize Clara. She'd smile when she saw her. She'd reach for her. It was good for Hope, Ethan told himself. She deserved to know her family. But it was also terrifying, because every week, Clara seemed to grow more attached. And every week, Ethan worried that when the final custody hearing came, she'd fight again. In early March, everything changed. Ethan was in town picking up supplies when he ran into Dr. Chen outside the general store. "Ethan," she said, her expression serious, "do you have a minute?" They stepped into the small coffee shop next door, and Dr. Chen ordered them both coffee before she spoke. "I need to tell you something," she said. "About Clara Whitford." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What about her?" "She came to see me last week. For a consultation." Dr. Chen paused. "She has stage 3 ovarian cancer." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. "Cancer," he repeated. "She wanted me to know because she's starting treatment next month. She said it might affect her ability to attend the visitations regularly. But Ethan," Dr. Chen leaned forward, "she also said she's not going to fight you anymore. For custody." Ethan stared at her. "What?" "She told me she's been thinking about what's best for Hope, and she's realized that what's best is stability, consistency, someone who can be there long term, and with her diagnosis," Dr. Chen's voice softened, "she knows she can't guarantee that." Ethan sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. Clara was dying, and she was giving up her fight for Hope. "Did she say anything else?" Ethan asked. "She asked me to tell you something. She said, 'Tell him I trust him. Tell him to tell Hope about Rebecca, about us. Tell him not to let her forget where she came from.'" Ethan's throat tightened. That night, he sat in the rocking chair with Hope in his arms, staring into the fire. Clara was dying. The woman who'd fought so hard for Hope, who'd shown up week after week to see her, who'd loved her from a distance, she was dying, and she'd chosen to let Hope stay with him. The weight of that decision settled over Ethan like a mantle. He looked down at Hope, who was watching the firelight dance across the ceiling. "Your grandmother is a brave woman," he whispered, "and when you're older, I'm going to make sure you know that. I'm going to make sure you know all of them. Clara, Rebecca, everyone who loved you, because you deserve to know where you came from, even if you're staying here with me." Hope yawned, her tiny mouth opening wide, and Ethan smiled despite the tears on his face. "You're stuck with me, kid," he said, "for better or worse." The next Saturday, Ethan arrived at the visitation center to find Clara waiting outside, a scarf wrapped around her head. She'd lost her hair. "The treatment started," she said simply when she saw him looking. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "Don't be. I'm fighting, and I get to see my granddaughter. That's worth fighting for." They went inside, and Clara held Hope for the full hour, singing to her, reading to her, memorizing every detail of her face. When time was up, Clara looked at Ethan. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I know," Ethan said quietly. "Dr. Chen told me." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not giving up on her. I'm giving her to you. There's a difference." "I know that too. She needs to know about Rebecca, about me, about where she came from." "She will," Ethan promised. "I'll make sure of it." Clara reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving her, for loving her, for being the father she needed." Ethan squeezed back. "Thank you for trusting me with her." That evening, as Ethan drove home with Hope asleep in the back seat, he felt something shift inside him. For 15 years, he'd been running from loss. But maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to let himself love again, fully, completely, without the fear of what might happen. Because Hope had already happened, and she'd changed everything. When they got home, Jonas was waiting on the porch with a casserole and a 6-pack of beer. "Heard about Clara," he said. "Figured you might need company." They sat on the porch while Hope napped inside, and Ethan told Jonas everything, about Clara's diagnosis, about her decision to stop fighting, about the promise he'd made. "You're a good man, Ethan Ward," Jonas said when he finished. "I'm just trying to be the man Hope needs me to be. That's what makes you good." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the mountains. "You know what?" Jonas said eventually. "I think you're going to be okay. Both of you." And for the first time in 15 years, Ethan believed him. The months passed in a blur of milestones and moments. Hope learned to roll over, then to sit up on her own. She started eating solid foods, making faces at the pureed carrots Ethan carefully spooned into her mouth. She babbled constantly, stringing together sounds that almost resembled words. Clara came to visit every week, though some weeks she was too weak from treatment and had to cancel. On those weeks, Ethan would call her and hold the phone up to Hope's ear so Clara could talk to her, tell her stories, sing her songs. In May, Clara's cancer went into remission. "It's a miracle," she told Ethan, tears streaming down her face during a visitation. "The doctor said the treatment worked better than they expected." "That's wonderful," Ethan said, and meant it. "I'm going to be here," Clara said, holding Hope close. "I'm going to be here to watch her grow up." And Ethan realized he was glad, because Hope deserved all the love she could get. The final custody hearing was scheduled for June 15th. Ethan woke that morning with Hope babbling in her crib beside his bed. She'd outgrown the bassinet months ago and felt surprisingly calm. Whatever happened today, he knew he'd done everything he could. He'd loved Hope with everything he had, and that had to be enough. At the courthouse, Clara was waiting with her lawyer, but this time there was no tension between them. She smiled when she saw Hope, and Hope reached for her, babbling excitedly. "She's gotten so big," Clara said, her voice full of wonder. "She has," Ethan agreed. In the courtroom, Judge Morrison reviewed the past 6 months, the home visits from social services, the reports from the visitation supervisor, the medical records showing Hope's continued health and development. Then he looked at both parties. "Mrs. Whitford, I understand you've withdrawn your petition for full custody. Is that correct?" Clara stood. "Yes, Your Honor. After much thought and prayer, I've realized that Hope's best interest is to remain with Mr. Ward. He's proven himself to be a devoted, capable father. And while I love my granddaughter with all my heart, I recognize that stability is more important than biology." Judge Morrison nodded. "Mr. Ward, do you wish to pursue permanent custody?" Ethan stood, Hope in his arms. "Yes, Your Honor. I want to adopt her, legally, permanently. I want her to be mine in every way." "And Mrs. Whitford, how do you feel about that?" Clara's voice was steady. "I support it fully. I only ask that I be allowed to remain in Hope's life, as her grandmother." Judge Morrison looked at Ethan. "I have no problem with that," Ethan said. "Clara is Hope's family. She deserves to know her." The judge picked up his gavel. "Then it's the order of this court that permanent custody of Hope Ward be granted to Ethan Ward with full rights to pursue legal adoption. Mrs. Whitford will retain visitation rights as previously established. This case is closed." The gavel fell. And just like that, it was over. Hope was his. Not temporarily. Not conditionally. Forever. Outside the courthouse, the June sun was warm on Ethan's face, and for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe without the weight of uncertainty pressing against his ribs. Hope squirmed in his arms, reaching for a butterfly that danced past them on the breeze, and Ethan found himself laughing, a sound that felt foreign and familiar all at once. Clara emerged from the courthouse behind them, moving slower than she used to, the cancer treatment still taking its toll even in remission, but there was something lighter in her expression now, something that hadn't been there during those first terrible weeks of fighting. "Congratulations," she said, and her smile was genuine. "She's officially yours." "She always was," Ethan said quietly, "but thank you for understanding, for letting her stay." Clara reached out and touched Hope's cheek with trembling fingers. "I didn't let her stay. I let her have the father she deserves. There's a difference." Hope grabbed Clara's finger and held on, babbling something that might have been a word or might have just been noise, and Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Will you bring her by next Saturday?" Clara asked. "I want to take her to the park. There's a duck pond she'd love." "We'll be there," Ethan promised. Margaret appeared beside them, her briefcase in one hand and a satisfied smile on her face. "Well, Mr. Ward, I'd say this turned out better than we hoped. Full custody, adoption rights, and no more court dates hanging over your head." "What do I owe you?" Ethan asked. He'd been dreading this conversation. Lawyers weren't cheap, and his savings had taken a hit over the past 6 months. Margaret waved him off. "Consider it pro bono. Any case where I get to see a good man win custody of a child who clearly belongs with him, that's payment enough." She glanced at Hope, who was now trying to eat her own fist. Besides, something tells me you're going to need that money for diapers. Jonas was waiting by his truck in the parking lot, and when he saw Ethan's face, he let out a whoop that echoed across the asphalt. "You did it," Jonas said, pulling Ethan into a one-armed hug that nearly crushed hope between them. "I knew you would, you stubborn bastard." "Language," Ethan said, but he was grinning. "She's 6 months old. She doesn't know what that means yet." Jonas tickled Hope's foot, making her giggle. "But yeah, I'll watch my mouth. Don't want to be a bad influence on my goddaughter." The word stopped Ethan cold. "Goddaughter?" Jonas shrugged, suddenly looking embarrassed. "Well, I mean, if you're doing the adoption thing officially, you're probably going to need someone to be her godfather. And seeing as I'm the only person crazy enough to put up with you on a regular basis, I figured, yeah," Ethan said, his throat tight. "Yeah, you're right. She needs a godfather." Jonas's face split into a wide grin. "Well then, guess that makes it official. Come on, let's get you two home. I'm buying lunch on the way." They stopped at the diner in Pinewood, and within minutes of walking through the door, every head in the place turned to look at them. Ethan had been avoiding town as much as possible over the past 6 months, sending Jonas to pick up supplies when he could, but there was no avoiding it now. The custody battle had been the talk of the town for months, and everyone wanted to know how it had ended. Martha Jensen, who'd been running the diner since before Ethan was born, came over to their booth with a pot of coffee and a knowing smile. "Heard you won custody," she said, pouring coffee into Ethan's cup without asking. "About damn time, if you ask me. Anyone with eyes could see that baby belongs with you." "Thank you, Martha," Ethan said, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "Don't thank me. Just bring her by more often. This town's been too quiet without the sound of children." She leaned down to look at Hope, who was gnawing on a teething ring in Ethan's lap. "She's got your stubbornness in her eyes. God help us all." Other people stopped by their booth as they ate. People Ethan hadn't spoken to in years, offering congratulations, sharing stories about their own children, asking when Ethan was going to bring Hope to the church picnic in July. It was overwhelming and uncomfortable and strangely comforting all at once. He'd spent 15 years isolating himself from this community, convinced that distance was the only way to protect himself from more loss. But sitting here with Hope in his arms and Jonas across from him, listening to Martha argue with old Bill Tucker about whether the coffee was too weak, Ethan realized something. He'd been living half a life, and Hope had given him permission to start living a whole one again. The summer unfolded in a rhythm Ethan had never experienced before. Morning started early with Hope's cheerful babbling from her crib, demanding breakfast and attention. Ethan would carry her through his morning chores, narrating everything he did the way he'd seen other parents do in town. She'd watch him feed the chickens, wide-eyed and fascinated, and shriek with delight when the barn cat wound between his legs. Clara visited every Saturday without fail, and slowly, Hope began to understand that this elegant woman with the soft hands and gentle voice was someone special. She'd light up when Clara arrived, reaching for her, and Clara would spend hours on the floor of Ethan's cabin, playing with blocks and reading board books in a voice that grew stronger each week as her health improved. One afternoon in late July, Clara brought a photo album. "I thought it was time," she said, settling onto the couch with Hope beside her, "for her to see her mother." Ethan's chest tightened, but he nodded and sat down on Hope's other side. Clara opened the album to the first page, revealing a photograph of a young woman with dark hair and Hope's same eyes, smiling at the camera with the kind of reckless joy that came from being young and free. "This is Rebecca," Clara said softly, though Hope was too young to understand. "Your mother. This was taken when she was 17, before everything got complicated." She turned the pages slowly, showing pictures of Rebecca at various ages, as a child in pigtails, as a teenager in a prom dress, as a young woman holding a diploma. The pictures stopped abruptly when Rebecca was in her mid-20s, and Clara's voice grew quieter. "She struggled," Clara said, "with addiction, with depression, with demons I couldn't understand. I tried to help her, but sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes people need more than we can give." Ethan watched Clara's face as she spoke, saw the guilt and grief etched into every line, and felt a deep ache of recognition. He knew what it was like to carry the weight of someone you couldn't save. "She loved you, though," Claire continued, touching Hope's cheek. She must have, because even in her darkest moment, she made sure you'd have a chance. She brought you to Ethan's barn because she knew, somehow she knew, that he'd take care of you. How did she know? Ethan asked. I never met Rebecca. How could she have known I'd be there? Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out another photograph from the back of the album. It showed Rebecca standing in front of a building Ethan recognized, the church in Pinewood. She grew up here, Clara said, before we moved to Helena when she was 12. She used to play in these woods, explore these ranches. She knew this area like the back of her hand. Clara looked at Ethan. And she remembered you, you and Emma, the couple who lived on the Ward Ranch. Rebecca told me once, years ago, that she'd seen you two in town and thought you were the happiest people she'd ever seen. She said you looked like you knew how to love right. Ethan felt something break open in his chest. She left Hope with you because she remembered that, Clara said. She was hoping that some of that happiness, that love, was still here. And she was right. Hope chose that moment to grab at the photograph, her pudgy fingers leaving smudges on the plastic sleeve, and both Clara and Ethan laughed through their tears. Thank you for showing me this, Ethan said, and for telling me about her. Hope deserves to know where she came from. She deserves to know both her stories, Clara said, the one that brought her here and the one that saved her. As summer deepened into August, Ethan found himself settling into fatherhood with a confidence he hadn't known he possessed. He learned to interpret Hope's different cries, to know when she was hungry versus tired versus just wanting attention. He learned to function on 4 hours of sleep and to find joy in the smallest things, a successful nap, a new food she actually liked, the way she'd laugh when he made funny faces. But with the confidence came fear. Not the paralyzing fear of those first few weeks, but something quieter, more insidious. It crept in during the quiet moments, when Hope was sleeping and the cabin was still. It whispered that he was going to fail her somehow, that he wasn't equipped to handle whatever came next, that one mistake could cost her everything. He didn't talk about it with Jonas, didn't want to burden his friend with the constant anxiety that hummed under his skin, but Jonas knew him too well. You're doing that thing again, Jonas said one evening, watching Ethan pace the cabin with Hope asleep against his shoulder. What thing? That thing where you convince yourself disaster is right around the corner. Jonas leaned back in his chair. She's fine, Ethan. You're fine. Stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm not. Yes, you are. You've been waiting for it for 15 years, ever since Emma. Jonas's voice softened. But this isn't then. Hope isn't going anywhere. She's healthy, she's happy, and she's got a father who'd walk through fire for her. That's more than a lot of kids get. Ethan stopped pacing. What if I mess her up? What if I don't know how to give her what she needs? Then you'll figure it out, same way every other parent does, by making mistakes and learning from them. Jonas stood and clapped him on the shoulder. You're not going to be perfect, Ethan, but you're going to be there, and that's what matters. The words settled over Ethan like a balm, and he felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. When did you get so wise? He asked. Always been wise. You just weren't listening. Jonas grabbed his coat. Now put that baby to bed and get some sleep yourself. You look like hell. After Jonas left, Ethan stood in the doorway of Hope's room. He'd converted the spare bedroom into a nursery over the summer, painting the walls a soft yellow and assembling a crib that had taken him 3 frustrating hours to put together, and watched her sleep. She was on her back, her arms thrown over her head in complete abandon, her chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of dreams. She looked so peaceful, so utterly trusting, and Ethan felt the familiar ache of love mixed with terror. I'm going to mess this up sometimes, he whispered to her. I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes, but I promise you this. I'm never going to stop trying. I'm never going to give up on you, and I'm never going to let you forget that you're loved. Hope sighed in her sleep, and Ethan pulled the door closed with a soft click. The first real crisis came in September. Ethan had taken Hope into town for her 9-month checkup, and Dr. Chen had seemed concerned about a slight fever and a rash on Hope's torso. She'd recommended they monitor it closely, and if it got worse, to bring Hope back immediately. That night, the fever spiked to 102. Ethan tried everything. Lukewarm baths, infant acetaminophen, cold compresses, but nothing brought the fever down. Hope was listless and whimpering, her skin hot to the touch, and by midnight Ethan was gripped by a panic so fierce it made his hand shake. He called Jonas, who arrived 20 minutes later still in his pajamas. "We need to get her to the hospital," Ethan said, his voice tight. Jonas took one look at Hope and nodded. "I'll drive. You stay in the back with her." The nearest hospital was 40 miles away in Great Falls, and the drive through the dark Montana night felt endless. Ethan sat in the back seat with Hope in his arms, watching her labored breathing, feeling utterly helpless. "Stay with me, baby girl," he whispered. "Please stay with me." At the hospital, they were rushed into the emergency room, where a team of doctors and nurses descended on Hope with efficient urgency. They took her from Ethan's arms, and he felt like his heart was being ripped out of his chest. "Sir, you need to wait here," a nurse said, guiding him to a small waiting area. "I need to be with her. They're taking good care of her. Let them work." Jonas sat with him in the waiting room, both of them silent, both of them praying in their own ways. An hour passed, then 2. Ethan couldn't sit still. He paced. He stared at the doors Hope had disappeared through. He imagined every worst-case scenario. Finally, a doctor emerged, and Ethan was on his feet instantly. "Mr. Ward, your daughter has roseola. It's a common viral infection in infants. The fever is dramatic, but it's not dangerous. We've given her fluids and medication to bring the fever down, and she should be fine to go home in a few hours." Relief hit Ethan so hard his knees nearly buckled. "She's okay?" "She's okay. You can see her now." Ethan followed the doctor to a small room where Hope was lying in a hospital crib, hooked up to an IV. She was still feverish and fussy, but when she saw Ethan, she reached for him with a cry that was equal parts misery and relief. He gathered her into his arms carefully, mindful of the IV line, and held her close. "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you, sweetheart." Hope buried her face against his chest and let out a shuddering sigh, and Ethan felt tears slip down his face. This was what it meant to be a parent, he realized. This terror, this helplessness, this overwhelming relief when they were okay. This constant fear that you might lose them mixed with the fierce determination to protect them from everything. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. It was the most important thing he'd ever done. They brought Hope home as the sun was rising, painting the Montana sky in shades of pink and gold. Jonas helped Ethan get her settled in her crib, and they both stood there for a moment, watching her sleep. "You did good tonight," Jonas said quietly. "You didn't panic. You got her help. You were there for her." "I felt like I was falling apart," Ethan admitted. "Yeah, well, you held it together where it counted. That's what being a father is. Falling apart on the inside, but staying strong on the outside." Jonas squeezed his shoulder. "Emma would be proud of you." The name landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through Ethan's chest. He hadn't thought about Emma in weeks, not consciously anyway. She was always there, a quiet presence in the back of his mind, but he'd stopped measuring every moment against the life they'd almost had. "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "Maybe she would be." As fall arrived and the leaves turned gold and red across the mountains, Hope continued to grow and change with a speed that left Ethan breathless. She started pulling herself up on furniture, taking tentative steps while holding onto the coffee table, babbling in long strings of syllables that almost sounded like sentences. She developed preferences. She loved sweet potatoes but hated peas, loved the barn cat but was terrified of the rooster, loved bath time but hated getting her hair washed. She was becoming a person, and Ethan was learning who she was. Claire's visits remained consistent through the fall, though she moved more slowly now, the cancer treatments leaving her weaker than she wanted to admit. She brought presents for Hope, soft toys, beautiful dresses, books about princesses and adventures, and she'd spend hours on the floor playing with her granddaughter, both of them laughing at jokes only they understood. One Saturday in October, Clara arrived with something different. "I made this for her," she said, pulling out a quilt from a bag. It was beautiful. Patches of fabric in blues and yellows and greens stitched together with meticulous care. In the center was an embroidered scene, a barn, a man holding a baby, stars overhead. "Clara," Ethan breathed, "this is incredible." I wanted her to have something that told her story, the true one. Clara's fingers traced the embroidery. The barn where you found her. You holding her. The stars that were out that Christmas morning. She looked up at Ethan. I want her to know that her story isn't one of abandonment. It's one of being found, of being chosen. Ethan took the quilt with trembling hands. Thank you. This means more than you know. That night, he tucked Hope into bed with the new quilt, and she immediately clutched it close, rubbing her face against the soft fabric. This is your story, Ethan told her, even though she was too young to understand. You were lost, and then you were found. And now you're loved, always loved. Hope yawned and closed her eyes, and within minutes, she was asleep. Ethan stood there watching her, this tiny human who'd crashed into his life like a meteor, destroying everything he'd built to protect himself and replacing it with something infinitely better. The adoption paperwork was finalized in November, right before Thanksgiving. Margaret called to give him the news, her voice warm with satisfaction. It's official. Hope Elizabeth Ward is legally your daughter. Congratulations, Dad. The word, Dad, hit Ethan with unexpected force. He'd been dad in his heart for months now, but having it legal, having it official, made it feel real in a way he hadn't anticipated. That evening, he sat Hope down in her high chair and tried to explain what had happened, even though she was far too young to understand. You're mine now, he said, holding her small hand. Not just in my heart, but in every way that matters. Your name is Hope Elizabeth Ward, and you're my daughter, and I'm your dad, and that's never going to change. Hope responded by smashing a handful of mashed banana into her hair, and Ethan laughed until his sides hurt. For Thanksgiving, Jonas insisted on hosting a celebration at his place. First holiday with your daughter being officially yours, he said. We're doing this right. Clara came too, bringing enough side dishes to feed an army, and the three adults plus Hope sat around Jonas's table in a strange, wonderful parody of a family dinner. Hope sat in her high chair between Ethan and Clara, alternately charming them both by clapping her hands and horrifying them by trying to eat turkey with her fists. To new families, Jonas said, raising his glass. To second chances, Clara added. To hope, Ethan said quietly. For giving us all a reason to be grateful. They clinked glasses, and Hope shrieked with delight at the sound, making everyone laugh. As Ethan drove home that night, Hope sleeping in her car seat behind him, he thought about how much had changed in 11 months. Last Thanksgiving, he'd been alone in his cabin, eating a frozen dinner and trying not to think about all the Thanksgivings he'd lost when Emma died. This Thanksgiving, he had a daughter. He had friends. He had a family, strange and cobbled together as it was. He had a life again. Winter came early that year, with snow falling in thick sheets by mid-December. Ethan prepared for it the way he always did, stocking up on supplies, making sure the cabin was weatherproofed, checking the generator, but this time he was preparing for two. He bought warmer clothes for Hope, who'd grown out of everything from the previous winter. He made sure he had extra formula and diapers in case they got snowed in. He even bought a small space heater for her room, just in case. And as Christmas approached, he felt the familiar ache of old grief mixed with something new, anticipation. Because this Christmas wouldn't be like the last 15. This Christmas, he wouldn't be alone. On Christmas Eve, Ethan bundled Hope into her warmest coat and carried her out to the barn. Snow was falling softly, catching in his hair and on Hope's nose, making her giggle. This is where I found you, he told her, pushing open the barn doors. Right here, in this spot. The barn looked the same as it had that morning. Hay scattered across the floor, the smell of animals and old wood, the drafty cold seeping in through the gaps. But to Ethan, it felt sacred now. Hallowed. This was where everything had changed. A year ago today, someone left you here, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. And I found you, and I was so scared. I didn't think I could do this. I didn't think I was strong enough. Hope looked up at him with her dark eyes, so serious, and Ethan felt tears slip down his face. But you made me strong. You gave me a reason to wake up, to keep going, to let myself love again. And I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm going to make mistakes, but I promise you, Hope, I'm going to spend every day for the rest of my life being worthy of you. Hope reached up and patted his face, her small hand cold from the winter air, and Ethan pulled her close. Merry Christmas, baby girl, he whispered. Thank you for saving my life. They spent Christmas morning in the cabin, just the two of them, with snow falling thick and steady outside the windows. Ethan had set up a small tree in the corner the week before, his first Christmas tree in 15 years, and decorated it with simple ornaments Jonas had brought over. Hope was mesmerized by the lights, sitting on the floor in her pajamas, reaching for the colored bulbs with both hands while making sounds of pure wonder. Ethan had bought her presents, though she was too young to understand what they meant. A stuffed bear, a set of blocks, a book about a rabbit who loved the snow. He sat on the floor beside her and helped her tear open the wrapping paper, laughing when she was more interested in the paper itself than the gifts inside. Next year you'll understand better, he told her, smoothing down her wild morning hair. Next year you'll probably wake me up at 5 in the morning because you're too excited to sleep. Hope babbled something that might have been agreement and went back to eating the wrapping paper. Around noon, Jonas arrived with Clara, both of them stamping snow off their boots on the porch. Clara looked tired but happy, her color better than it had been in months, and she carried a bag bulging with more presents. I know I already gave her the quilt, Clara said, setting the bag down. But I couldn't help myself. It's her first Christmas. They spent the afternoon together in the warm cabin, eating the meal Jonas had prepared and watching Hope demolish a piece of soft gingerbread. Clara told stories about Rebecca as a child, carefully curated memories that painted a picture of a girl who'd been bright and creative before the darkness came. Ethan listened, storing every detail away for the day when Hope would be old enough to ask about her birth mother. As the sun began to set, painting the snow outside in shades of pink and gold, Clara pulled Ethan aside while Jonas entertained Hope with a game of peekaboo. I need to tell you something, Clara said quietly. Ethan's stomach tightened. What is it? The cancer's back. She said it simply, without drama, the way someone might comment on the weather. They found it during my last scan. It's in my liver now. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and cold. Clara. I'm not going to do treatment this time, she continued. I did the chemo, the radiation, all of it, and I got 6 beautiful months of remission where I was strong enough to be with Hope. But I'm 68 years old, Ethan. I'm tired. And I don't want to spend whatever time I have left sick and weak. Ethan felt his throat close. How long? They're saying maybe a year, maybe less. Clara's eyes were dry, her voice steady. I wanted you to know so you can prepare Hope. Well, prepare yourself for eventually telling Hope. She won't remember me, not really, but I want her to know I existed, that I loved her. She'll know, Ethan said hoarsely. I'll make sure she knows. Clara smiled and touched his arm. I know you will. That's why I can let go, because I know she's safe with you. They stood there for a moment in the gathering darkness, 2 people bound together by love for the same child. And then Clara straightened her shoulders and walked back to where Hope was shrieking with laughter at Jonas's antics. Who wants to help Grandma read a story? Clara called out, and Hope immediately reached for her. Ethan watched them settle onto the couch together, Clara's voice soft as she read from one of the books she'd brought, and felt grief and gratitude war in his chest. Clara was dying, but she was here now. She was present for this Christmas, for this moment, for Hope, and maybe that was enough. The winter deepened and Clara's visits became less frequent as her health declined. Some Saturdays she was too weak to make the drive, and Ethan would bundle Hope into the truck and drive to Helena instead, spending the afternoon at Clara's elegant home while Hope played on the carpet and Clara watched from the couch, wrapped in blankets. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging loose on her frame, but her spirit remained strong. She told Hope stories, sang her songs, made sure every moment counted, and she continued adding to a journal she'd started months ago, a record of everything she wanted Hope to know about the Whitford family, about Rebecca, about where she came from. Promise me you'll give this to her when she's old enough, Clara said one afternoon in February, pressing the leather-bound journal into Ethan's hands. Promise me she'll know the truth, all of it. I promise, Ethan said. The good and the bad. Rebecca's struggles, her mistakes, but also her joy. She wasn't just an addict. She was a person who loved art and music and the mountains. She was funny. She was kind when she was well. I don't want Hope to only know the sad ending. She'll know everything, Ethan assured her. The whole story. Clara nodded, satisfied, and turned her attention back to Hope, who was attempting to stack blocks into an impossibly tall tower. In March, Clara was hospitalized. Ethan got the call from her lawyer, a man named David Chen, who explained that Clara had taken a fall and was now too weak to live alone. She'd been moved to a hospice facility in Helena, where she could receive round-the-clock care. Ethan drove there the next day with Hope, who was now walking confidently and chattering in a mixture of real words and invented language. She tottered down the hospice hallways, holding Ethan's hand, oblivious to the weight of where they were. Clara's room was sunny and comfortable, with flowers on every surface and photographs covering the walls. She was in bed, looking smaller than Ethan had ever seen her, but her face lit up when she saw Hope. "There's my girl," she whispered. Hope climbed onto the bed carefully, the way Ethan had taught her, and snuggled against Clara's side. Clara wrapped an arm around her, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, memorizing the weight of her. "Tell me about the ranch," Clara said to Ethan. "Tell me what she's learning." So Ethan told her everything. How Hope loved the chickens and would chase them around the yard. How she'd taken her first unassisted steps from the porch to the barn. How she'd started saying "Dada," clear as a bell, along with "no" and "mine" and "cookie." How she'd developed a fascination with the barn cat and would spend hours trying to pet it, even though it usually ran away. Clara listened with her eyes closed, a smile on her face, and Hope babbled along with Ethan's stories, adding her own commentary in a language only she understood. They visited 3 more times over the next 2 weeks, and each time Clara was a little weaker, a little more distant. But she always rallied when Hope arrived, always found the energy to smile, to listen, to hold her granddaughter close. On the last visit, Clara could barely speak, but she held Hope's hand and looked at Ethan with eyes that held everything she couldn't say. "Thank you," she mouthed. "Thank you," Ethan replied. Clara died 2 days later, peacefully in her sleep, with the journal for Hope and a photograph of Rebecca on the table beside her bed. The funeral was small, held in the same Helena church where Clara had been married 40 years earlier. Ethan sat in the back with Hope in his lap, listening to people talk about Clara's life, her charity work, her devotion to her daughter, her final act of love in entrusting her granddaughter to someone who could give her stability. David Chen approached Ethan after the service, carrying a manila envelope. "Clara left this for you," he said. "She updated her will last month. She wanted you to have it." Inside was a letter in Clara's elegant handwriting and a check that made Ethan's breath catch. The letter read, "Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I won't pretend to be sad about that. I've made my peace with death, and I'm ready to see Rebecca again, wherever she is. The money in this envelope is from Rebecca's trust fund, which I've held on to all these years hoping she'd come home. She never did, but her daughter did. And so I want Hope to have it. Use it for her education. Use it to expand the ranch if you need to. Use it to give her opportunities I couldn't give Rebecca. Use it however you see fit, because I trust you. You've proven yourself to be exactly the kind of father I always hoped Rebecca would find for her child. Tell Hope about us. Tell her about the complicated, messy, beautiful family she came from. Tell her that despite everything that went wrong, she was loved. Always loved. Thank you for giving an old woman these last beautiful months with her granddaughter. Thank you for letting me be part of Hope's life. And thank you for being the man who was there when it mattered most." With all my love and gratitude, Clara Ethan read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face, while Hope played with his tie and hummed to herself. Spring came to Montana with the usual dramatic flourish of melting snow and sudden wildflowers. The ranch burst into life, and Hope discovered the joy of puddles, of mud, of chasing butterflies through the tall grass. She was 15 months old now, sturdy and confident, with Ethan's stubbornness and her own fierce independence. Ethan used part of Clara's money to hire help for the ranch, a young man named Tyler who was trying to save up for veterinary school. With Tyler handling some of the daily work, Ethan had more time to spend with Hope, teaching her about the animals, letting her help with chores that mostly involved her getting in the way while he worked. Jonas came by one afternoon in April to find Ethan attempting to fix a fence while Hope sat in the grass nearby, arranging dandelions into a pattern only she understood. "She's gotten big," Jonas observed. "Tell me about it. I can barely keep her in clothes. She grows out of everything in a month." "You look happy," Jonas said. It wasn't a question. Ethan glanced at Hope, who had abandoned the dandelions and was now trying to eat a handful of grass. "Yeah," he said. "I am." "Good. It's about damn time." Jonas pulled a beer from the cooler in his truck. "So, you thought about enrolling her in that preschool program in town. She's old enough now." "I've thought about it," Ethan admitted. "But I don't know. I like having her here with me." "I know you do, but she needs to be around other kids eventually. Needs to learn how to exist in the world beyond this ranch." Ethan knew Jonas was right. As much as he wanted to keep Hope safe and close forever, she deserved more than just him and the cattle and the endless Montana sky. She deserved friends, experiences, a life. "I'll think about it," he said. "Think fast. Enrollment closes next month." That night, after Hope was asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with Clara's journal open in front of him. He'd read it cover to cover in the weeks since the funeral, absorbing Clara's stories, her memories, her careful documentation of the Whitford family history. But tonight, he opened to a blank page in the back and picked up a pen. "Dear Hope," he wrote, "by the time you read this, you'll be old enough to have questions about where you came from, about why your mother left you, about who Clara was and why I'm the one raising you. I want you to know the truth, even though it's complicated and messy and sometimes painful. Your mother, Rebecca, was sick. Not with the kind of sickness doctors can cure with medicine, but with the kind that lives in your mind and your heart. She struggled with addiction and depression, and despite how much Clara tried to help her, sometimes love isn't enough to save someone who can't save themselves. But she loved you. I have to believe that because on Christmas morning, she didn't abandon you in just any barn. She brought you to mine, to a place she remembered as being safe, to a man she once saw and thought looked like he knew how to love. And Clara, your grandmother, she fought for you even when she was dying. She made sure you'd have everything you needed. She left you her stories, her memories, and enough money to build any future you want. As for me, I'm just the guy who was in the right place at the right time. Or maybe the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on how you look at it. I was broken when I found you. I'd spent 15 years hiding from the world, from pain, from the possibility of loss. But you fixed me. You gave me a reason to live again. And even though this journey started with someone else's decision to leave you, it became my decision to keep you, to love you, to be your father. I won't always get it right. I'll make mistakes. I'll probably embarrass you when you're a teenager. I'll worry too much and hold on too tight, but I'll be here, always. That's my promise to you. Love, Dad. Ethan closed the journal and added it to the box where he kept all of Hope's important documents, her adoption papers, her medical records, photographs from her first year. Someday, when she was old enough, he'd give her all of it, the whole complicated story. But for now, she was just his daughter, and that was enough. May brought with it Hope's first birthday as officially Hope Elizabeth Ward. Ethan threw a party at the ranch, inviting Jonas, Tyler, Dr. Chen, Martha from the diner, and half the town of Pinewood. He made a cake that fell apart in the middle but tasted good anyway, and Hope sat in her high chair wearing a ridiculous party hat, smashing her hands into the frosting while everyone sang. She'd learned to say more words now, cat and cow, and more, and her favorite, outside. She had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about expressing them, usually by stamping her foot and shouting, "No!" at the top of her lungs. She was perfect. After everyone left and the cabin was quiet again, Ethan gave Hope her bath and got her ready for bed. She fought sleep the way she always did, convinced she was missing something important, but eventually she gave in, her eyes fluttering closed as Ethan rocked her in the chair by her window. "Happy birthday, baby girl," he whispered. "You've been in my life for exactly 1 year and 4 months, and I can't remember what it was like before you. I can't remember who I was before you." Hope's hand was curled around his thumb, and Ethan marveled at how something so small could hold his entire heart. Summer arrived with long days and warm nights, and Ethan made the decision to enroll Hope in the part-time preschool program Jonas had mentioned. It was only 2 days a week, just 3 hours each day, but dropping her off that first morning felt like cutting off his own arm. "She'll be fine," the teacher, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, assured him. "We'll take good care of her." "I know," Ethan said, holding Hope a little too tight. I know you will. Hope, for her part, was fascinated by all the new toys and children and didn't even look back when Ethan left. He stood in the parking lot for 10 minutes, staring at the building, before Jonas called him. Did you drop her off? Yeah. And did you stand in the parking lot afterward like a stalker? How did you Because I know you. Now get in your truck and go home. She's fine. You're fine. This is what normal parents do. Ethan drove home, worked on ranch repairs to distract himself, and was back at the preschool 20 minutes early to pick Hope up. She ran to him when she saw him, shouting, "Dada!" with such enthusiasm that his heart nearly burst. "How was it?" he asked. "Play," Hope announced. "Friends." Mrs. Patterson approached with a smile. She did wonderfully, made friends with everyone, shared her toys, and only cried once when another child took her crayon. She's a sweetheart, Mr. Ward. Pride swelled in Ethan's chest so strongly he thought he might float away. His daughter. His brilliant, brave, perfect daughter. As summer deepened into fall, life settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Ethan worked the ranch with Tyler's help, took Hope to preschool twice a week, and spent his evenings reading to her or watching her play. They visited Jonas regularly. They went to town events that Ethan would never have attended before Hope. They built a life that was full and rich and nothing like the lonely existence Ethan had endured for 15 years. On the anniversary of finding Hope, Christmas morning, 2 years after that first fateful dawn, Ethan woke early and carried his sleeping daughter out to the barn just as the sun was rising. The barn looked exactly the same as it had that morning. The same hay-scattered floor, the same drafty cold, the same quiet waiting. But everything else was different. 2 years ago, Ethan said to Hope, who was stirring awake against his shoulder, "I found you right here. You were so small, so cold, and I was so scared." Hope looked around the barn with interest, then pointed at the barn cat sleeping in the corner. "Kitty," Ethan laughed. "Yeah, sweetheart, Kitty." "Down," Hope demanded, and Ethan set her on her feet, watching as she tottered over to the cat to pet it with surprising gentleness. He thought about the note he'd found with her, "Please love her. I cannot." Rebecca had been wrong about one thing. She could love Hope. Ethan believed that with his whole heart. She just couldn't love herself enough to stay, couldn't fight through her demons to get to the other side. But she'd given Hope to someone who could, and Clara had made sure Hope would know where she came from, that she was part of a complicated, beautiful, heartbreaking story that ended not with abandonment, but with love. Hope came back to Ethan and raised her arms. "Up!" He picked her up and held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid weight of her in his arms. "I love you," he said, "more than anything in this world. Do you know that?" Hope patted his face with her small hand. "Love, Dada." And there it was. Everything that mattered contained in 3 simple words from a 2-year-old who had saved his life just as surely as he'd saved hers. They walked back to the cabin together through the snow, and Ethan thought about how 2 years ago he'd made this same walk with a newborn baby in his arms, terrified and alone, and certain he'd fail. Now he walked with a confident toddler who held his hand and chattered about kitties and Christmas, and he wasn't terrified anymore. He was just a father, doing his best, making mistakes, learning as he went. And that was enough. That would always be enough. Inside the cabin, Jonas was waiting with breakfast and presents for Hope. He'd made it a tradition to spend Christmas morning with them. Tyler showed up around noon with a homemade pie. Martha stopped by with cookies. Dr. Chen dropped off a gift. The cabin that had once been a monument to solitude and grief had become something else entirely. It had become a home, a place where people gathered, where laughter lived, where a little girl could grow up surrounded by love. That evening, after everyone had left and Hope was asleep, Ethan sat by the fire with a photograph he'd found in Clara's journal. It showed Rebecca at 5 years old, laughing at the camera, her whole life still ahead of her, before the darkness came. "Your daughter is amazing," Ethan said to the photograph. "I wish you could see her. I wish you could know that she's safe and happy and so loved. I wish things had been different for you." He set the photograph on the mantel next to a picture of Clara holding Hope, next to a picture of Hope taking her first steps. A family album, complicated and cobbled together and unconventional, but a family nonetheless. Hope stirred in her room, and Ethan went to check on her. She was still asleep, clutching the quilt Clara had made her dark hair spread across the pillow. Ethan adjusted her blanket and kissed her forehead. "Sleep well, baby girl," he whispered. "Tomorrow, we start another year together. Another year of adventures and mistakes and love. So much love." He stood in the doorway for a moment longer, watching his daughter sleep, and felt peace settle over him like snowfall. 15 years ago, he'd lost everything that mattered. He'd lost his wife, his unborn son, his future. He'd spent over a decade building walls to keep the pain out, convinced that love was too dangerous, that loss was inevitable. But then a baby had appeared in his barn on Christmas morning, and those walls had crumbled. And Ethan Ward, the man who'd sworn never to love again, had discovered that love wasn't something you controlled or protected yourself from. It was something that found you in your darkest moment and refused to let go. It was a tiny hand wrapped around your finger. It was a voice calling Dada from across a room. It was every sleepless night and every worried moment and every burst of joy when they smiled. It was messy and terrifying and exhausting and absolutely worth it. Hope had saved him, not just by existing, but by demanding that he show up every single day, even when it was hard, even when he was scared, even when he didn't know what he was doing. She taught him that love didn't have to come from blood. It could come from choice, from commitment, from showing up again and again, day after day, until showing up became who you were. And she taught him that second chances were real, that life could surprise you, that even in your darkest winter, spring could come again. Ethan closed Hope's door quietly and walked back to the living room. Through the window, he could see snow falling softly over the ranch, covering everything in a blanket of white. The barn where he'd found Hope stood dark against the sky, a silent witness to the miracle that had happened there 2 years ago. He'd walked into that barn expecting nothing and found everything. And now, standing in his cabin with his daughter asleep down the hall and the promise of tomorrow waiting just beyond the window, Ethan Ward finally understood what it meant to be whole again. The story had started with a note, "Please love her." And Ethan had done exactly that. He'd loved her completely, imperfectly, fiercely. And in loving her, he'd learned to love life again. He'd learned to hope again. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift Hope had given him. Not just her presence, but the permission to believe that happy endings were possible even after the worst losses. Ethan picked up his phone and called Jonas. "Merry Christmas, you old fool," Jonas answered. "Merry Christmas. Listen, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for us this past 2 years. You don't need to thank me. I do. You were there when I didn't know what I was doing, when I was terrified, when I thought I'd lose her. You never let me give up." Jonas was quiet for a moment. "She's a good kid. You're a good father. That's all the thanks I need. She asked about you earlier, wanted to know if Uncle Jonas was coming for breakfast tomorrow." "Uncle Jonas, huh? I like the sound of that," Jonas chuckled. "Yeah, I'll be there. Wouldn't miss it." After he hung up, Ethan stood at the window for a long time, watching the snow fall, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Rebecca, making an impossible choice to give her daughter a chance at life. Clara, fighting for hope, even as she was dying, making sure she'd be taken care of. Jonas, showing up day after day with casseroles and advice and unwavering support. And Hope herself, tiny, helpless Hope, who'd somehow known exactly what Ethan needed even before he did. All of them, in their own ways, had conspired to create this life, this family, this future. And Ethan was grateful for every single moment, even the hard ones, even the scary ones, because they'd led him here, to this cabin, to this child, to this profound sense of purpose and peace. He thought about the promise he'd made to Hope that first night, when he'd held her by the fire and sworn to try his best. He'd kept that promise, and he'd keep it every day for the rest of his life, because that's what fathers did. They showed up. They tried. They loved. And sometimes, if they were very lucky, that love was enough to heal old wounds and build new futures. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the ranch in silence and beauty. Inside, a father stood vigil over his sleeping daughter, his heart full, his purpose clear, his future bright with possibility. The story that had begun with abandonment had ended with belonging. The man who'd wanted nothing more than silence had found joy in a child's laughter. And the baby who'd been left to die had grown into a little girl who would be loved every day of her life. It wasn't the ending Ethan had expected when he'd walked into that barn 2 years ago. It was better. So much better. And as Ethan finally headed to bed, he whispered one last prayer of gratitude to whatever force had brought hope into his life. "Thank you," he said to the universe, to Rebecca, to Clara, to fate itself. "Thank you for trusting me with her. I won't let you down." And he knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that he wouldn't, because Hope Ward was his daughter, and Ethan Ward was her father, and that was all that mattered, now and always and forever.